Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second TDVAM webinar, Growing Healthy Relationships. My name is Olivia,
I'm Annie.
and we're both prevention education coordinators with Domestic Violence Services of Snohomish County. And yeah, thank you all for being here, for watching this. We had some technical difficulties with our initial presentation of this, so we decided to record it and post it to the YouTube. So hopefully if you're here, you also have been browsing the other videos that we have up on there as well, past webinars, kind of some more information about our agency, all that kind of stuff can be found on this YouTube channel as well. So this is really nice because we don't have to tell you how to get there because you're already there if you're watching this. So yeah, and I think since we're not doing this live, we don't have any disclaimers about recordings. And so yeah, welcome. Like we mentioned, February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And so for our theme this year, DVS, we are doing Let Love Grow. And so essentially we're talking about kind of like how to grow and foster healthy relationships in our communities. This one is pretty prevalent to our jobs, specifically in DVS as prevention coordinators, because that's what we spend all of our time doing, is trying to figure out how to kind of help people grow their healthy relationships. And that's going to be the focus of today's webinar. We did one a couple of weeks ago on planting the seeds of healthy relationships. So kind of what that can look like. That should be up on the YouTube as well, so you can check that out. And then in following weeks, we're going to be doing webinars on pulling the weeds in health or in relationships, and then when the seasons change. And so I won't say too much more about those, since those are going to be also great presentations, I'm sure, under this theme as well. So yeah, today, welcome to Growing Healthy Relationships. Our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to do just like a little recap of the previous webinar because they all, of course, like tie together. And then most of the like bulk of today is just going to be on, again, growing these healthy relationship strategies. So that's a lot of like what we do as prevention outreach coordinators, is talk about these things. And then we're going to touch briefly on like helping others as well. We talk about growing healthy relationships. We want to be also thinking about how we can kind of spread those ideas and like help others out in that area as well. Cool. So like I mentioned, last week we discussed the idea of planting the seeds of healthy relationships. So we discussed how to kind of communicate and model healthy relationships to our young people and in general in our communities. So again, if you haven't watched that, check it out on this YouTube channel. And then just to kind of recap a bit of what was discussed last week, Annie and Liz did a great job. They talked about the importance of having like early and age-appropriate conversations with youth about healthy relationships, about what they should look, feel, sound like, all those things. And this is because we believe that abuse is something that everyone can choose not to engage in, right? And not only that, but like foundationally, everybody deserves love, kindness, and respect. And so with those two things being true, having those early and often conversations with young people in communities becomes all that much more important. And they also discuss the way that like each of us can make a difference in planting these seeds, so to speak. So whether that's being somebody's safe adult, right? Letting a youth or multiple youth know that you're there for them. If they have questions, if they need something, they can come to you. It's a judgment-free zone, all of that stuff. Being a safe adult can be a huge way to kind of plant those seeds of safety and respect. Or whether that's planting the seeds in a different way, right? Maybe you have like a leadership role, maybe you're a teacher or some other kind of educator or a coach or something like that. And you take it upon yourself to create a culture where respect is expected, where healthy relationships are the norm. That's another like really cool and great way to kind of plant those seeds as well. And then we have, yeah, some more kind of like things listed here that were talked about last week. Again, and we won't go too deeply into it because hopefully you can watch that video yourself. Annie, is there anything that huge that I missed in the recap?
No, you just about summed it up.
Awesome. Cool. So we're going to move into the bulk of today's conversation, which is, again, strategies for growing healthy relationships. So fostering these things in our own lives, what that can kind of look like, some different strategies to kind of make that easier in our relationships with our partners, with our friends, with anyone really. Um, and before we jump into some of those like concrete strategies, I do want to make a quick distinction between some different types of relationships that you might have heard us talk about before if this isn't your first video with us, or you just might have kind of like heard floating around in the world. So you can see here we have kind of this like makeshift spectrum here. You can see that on the spectrum, relationships can go from healthy to unhealthy or toxic, right? And so healthy relationships, we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about how to kind of grow those things, what that can look like. When we're thinking about toxic relationships, we want to be thinking about relationships that are hurtful. They're not fun, right? They're damaging to both parties. And the reason for that is that both people in the relationship are engaging in unhealthy behaviors. So a lot of different things might come to mind when you think of unhealthy behaviors. You might think, like constant, really kind of petty arguing between two people about like every little thing, raising voices, calling names to each other, kind of that back and forth. You might think of like lying to each other, cheating on each other, giving each other the silent treatment, right? Just creating a space that's, again, it's not fun. It's certainly not beneficial or like nurturing to either person. And yeah, again, it's a hurtful environment. Even with all of that said, though, we do want to make the note that it is definitely possible for a relationship to move from toxic to healthy. It's not easy, but it is possible. And again, the reason for that is because even though it might be petty, it might be high drama, it might be unsatisfying or kind of rude, these relationships are still equal, right? Both people are engaging in these behaviors. Both people have things that they could be doing better in that relationship. And so if both people are willing to kind of commit to changing that relationship, changing their behaviors, holding each other accountable, all that good stuff, over time, it is possible to work on those kinds of relationships and to say, hey, like, I want this to be healthier. We both want this to be healthier. Let's kind of figure it out, take some steps toward doing that. Again, it's not easy. It's not like a quick process, but it's totally possible. So with this, you can see that on the spectrum, we do not have abusive relationships. And the reason for that is because we tend to think of abusive relationships as like a totally isolated point, not even on the spectrum. The reason for that is because it's not possible in the same way for a relationship that's abusive to just kind of slide up that spectrum and just move all the way to healthy. And again, the reason for that is because abusive relationships are unequal, right? In an abusive relationship, we have one person who has all the power and control over the other person. And they are taking that out on them in a number of different ways, whether that's physical violence, verbal violence, sexual violence, financial control, any number of other things that kind of exert that power and control. It's very one-sided. One person's living in fear, one person's being constantly disrespected by the other person. And so with that being the case, these abusive relationships are not just something that both people can kind of commit to working on and fixing together. It's not something that you can kind of just, go to couples therapy and work out, have a nice productive conversation and work out, because again, this one person has this constant entitlement to power and control in their minds. And so changing these kinds of relationships requires a lot of, a very long time of super intentional effort by the abuser to stop their behavior. Right? We often say nobody can stop the abuse except for the abuser. Andy, is there anything else that you want to add on this one?
Oh, yeah. Just to add that a lot of times somebody in an abusive relationship will feel like it's on them to change and that it's within their power to make the relationship better and healthy. But a lot of times the steps that they're being told by the abuser that they see include sacrificing a part of who they are. For example, like if I just stop hanging out with my friends, then my partner won't be jealous anymore and won't be making these accusations and won't get angry at me for it anymore. Or if I just make dinner every night and only make the things that my partner wants and not the food that I enjoy, or if we only go to restaurants that they want to go to, or if we only just do exactly what they want to do at all times, then there won't be any problems in the relationship anymore. And it is definitely the case where as somebody is giving these up, there could be less violence, less anger, less screaming and like punishing behaviors from their partner, but that doesn't mean that the relationship has become healthy. It means that they've sacrificed enough of themselves that their partner no longer feels that need to control them in so many ways with anger and with violence.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a lot of different ways that abusive is not on the spectrum. So we want to just put that out there kind of before we talk about like strategies for growing healthy relationships, even potentially out of toxic ones. We want to make this note first. And yeah, thank you, Annie. You always say that part so well. So I'm like, please do that now.
Thank you.
Cool. So the first thing that we're going to talk about, we're going to start super simple. And that's making these three things 100% givens in your relationship. That's kindness, respect, and empathy. Again, it may sound like really simplistic. This is something we all learn in like kindergarten, right? But there's a reason for that. And it's because these three things are extremely important foundations for a healthy relationship. And I think a lot of times like these things kind of get lumped together, like, yeah, okay, cool, kindness, respect, great. But I think it is important to like slow down and actually think about each of these things a little bit. And so when we're thinking about kindness, we truly want to be thinking about treating the other person with the gentleness, the care, the love that they deserve, right? Kindness can look a lot of different ways depending on the person, depending on the relationship. It can look like words, tone, body language. It can look like maybe acts of service, meaningful conversation, physical comfort, any of that kind of stuff. But again, it all comes back to like that tenderness, that gentleness, that care. And if before like every interaction that we have with our partner, or with our friend or with whoever, we really stop, pause, remember that they deserve to be treated with this kind of tenderness, this kind of kindness, it's going to help those interactions go more smoothly, right? Maybe in a conflict situation, maybe in just a conversation situation. If you remember, okay, like they do deserve to be treated gently, that's going to help them feel the kind of impacts of that kindness. And also it's probably going to help you to kind of have your voice be heard, have your needs be met more if you're approaching it with kindness, and not from like a stance of, again, like power or control, or even just kind of like rushing through or demanding things. When we're thinking about respect, we want to remember that everybody deserves dignity and autonomy. And this is, of course, even if we disagree with them, even if we can't relate to them, that's okay. Those things happen in relationships all the time. You should never be expected to 100% agree with your partner or relate to them on every single thing. That's never going to happen. It's not realistic. But when we're talking about respect, again, whether or not we agree, we want to be thinking about dignity and autonomy. So this is where we're validating them, right? We're listening to them. We're seeing and treating them as equals to us. And we're seeing and acknowledging that, again, they're their own person. We're honoring their differences. This is validating that their concerns are true for them. Whether they might seem like a big deal to us or not is actually not super relevant, right? We want to be giving them that space to be themselves, to have their needs, to express their opinions, all of that stuff. And then this leads us to empathy. So you've, heard this word before, it gets tossed around a lot, right? This is not just feeling for someone in their situation, kind of knowing that they're going through something or knowing the situation that they might be in, but also really trying to understand how that situation might be impacting them, whether that's like they're going through a hard time or whether that's just like any given situation that they're in. Imagining ourselves experiencing what they're experiencing. Empathy is a really big asset in conflict situations. If we can understand why it is that people might be feeling the need to act the way that they're acting, say the things they're saying, we're going to have much more productive conversations in general.
Yeah, and I think that as relationships go longer, like in the very beginning of relationship, we all try to be like super kind, super nice, super respectful. And then as things go on and we feel like we get to know the other person better, that we can kind of drop a lot of the social niceties when we're around them. And there's a lot of times that you can, like, not saying excuse me when you pass them, or just little things that we would do with people we don't know as well, that we don't feel like we have to do with our partner. But then when it comes to just basic kindness, it's always important to remember that you can't go wrong with being nice or with being respectful. And even if you do feel like a lot more comfortable with them, that doesn't mean that that kindness and that respect should lessen with time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a nice way to think about it is like it can be tempting to be like, well, I'm just super comfortable with them. So like, I feel really safe with them. So I can say whatever I want. But just remembering that has to go two ways, right? So if you're feeling comfortable with them is taking away from their ability to feel comfortable with you, then that's not an equal situation. We want to adjust that. So yeah, definitely. Wow, these things are going really slow today. Okay. So as we're talking about fostering relationships that are healthy, it's also really important to kind of dispel some common myths that are out there, especially because it is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. We think this is really important to highlight right now, and to talk about, because unfortunately, these are things that particularly young people are taught, both formally, but honestly, mostly informally, all the time, from the way that our society is structured, from the things that are like reflected in pop culture, media, all that stuff, and just common conversation. These are things that can be pretty easy to like fall into the trap of, and to believe if you aren't taught otherwise. And so we want to take a moment to address some of these things. Annie, I'll do the first two and you want to do the last two because I think those are the ones that you had highlighted last time. So the first one we have here is unpredictability. And that word probably wouldn't be used in the kind of myth. The word that might be used is like exciting, keeping you on your toes, right? Keeping you guessing. So this idea that a healthy relationship is exciting and electric in this way where you never really know what to expect. You're always kind of like, checking your phone to see if like what's happening. You're never really sure what they're going to say to you. You're never sure like how they're going to be acting, all those kinds of things. And this can be a really like blurry line because, of course, at the beginning of relationships, especially when you're getting to know someone, you're first starting to hang out, it can be unpredictable. That's like the nature of life, is you don't always know what to expect from the other person. That's the point of hanging out with someone, getting to know them, talking to them, all of that stuff. But if it starts to feel like it is anxiety inducing, it's overwhelming, and it's like taking away from your emotional energy and your mental health, that's not good, right? And that's not something that we should be writing off as just like, oh, that just means your relationship is fun. It means it's exciting, right? It means it's passionate. We all deserve to feel comfortable. We all deserve a relative amount of consistency in our interactions. And especially, again, as we do get to know people more, as we do hang out a couple more times or start to text them more, it should be starting to feel more comfortable, not less comfortable. And again, this doesn't mean that you're always going to know exactly what your partner is going to say to you or exactly what they're going to think about every single thing, or that every single interaction is going to be exactly the same all the time. But in general, right, we shouldn't be walking on eggshells around our partners. We shouldn't be having to hold our breath and guess what they're going to say to us or how they're going to react to something that we do. We should generally feel comfortable going into spaces and conversations with our partner, and knowing like generally what kind of things bug them, what kind of things they like, how they might talk to us, what kind of tone they might use. Those are all things that we can and should expect out of relationships. The next one that we have here is on jealousy. This is a huge one, that particularly in our work as prevention educators, we see this one all the time coming up. People really do tend to think that jealousy is like a sign of love or a sign of affection. So this one is also complicated, right? Because jealousy is a human emotion. We've all felt it. We've all felt it on numerous occasions. And that's okay. That doesn't make us monsters. It doesn't make us terrible people. But what's really important to kind of parse out or like know the difference between is that it's never okay to take jealousy out on someone. It's never okay to use jealousy as an excuse to control or belittle or anything else. And so you might hear things kind of like in pop culture, just in common conversation, that say things like, try to make them jealous. Like if they're jealous, that means they really like you. right? If they're telling you like you can't go see that other person or you can't go see your friends, that's good because that means they really care about you. And those are the myths that we really want to scrub out. Because if we are talking about like signs or proof that someone cares about you, loves you, we want to be looking for things like independence, trust. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. We're definitely not looking for things like you can't wear that, you can't go there, you can't talk to that person. Those are not signs of love, they're signs of insecurity.
Yeah. Another myth is that sex is a part of every healthy relationship. So that is not true. There's all kinds of reasons that somebody might want to refrain from sex, even in a healthy relationship. And not just sex, but really any sexual or intimate activity. It could be because of religious purposes, that they have like a timeline that they want to hold off on those activities until, such as marriage. It could be that they're asexual and they just don't have any desire to do those activities. Or it could be that they have some sort of trauma that has made it so that doing those things is just not comfortable or emotionally safe for them to do. There's really any number of reasons, and any of them are okay reasons for somebody not to want to have sex, even in a healthy relationship. And a lot of times, especially in teenage relationships, there can be a lot of pressure. Like saying, oh, everyone else our age is already doing it, or that like if we do this certain thing, then it's not going to count for religious reasons, and like pressuring their partner into doing things before they're not comfortable with, like peer pressure, or just asking them again and again. And then, as we know, saying yes isn't always consensual. That if yes is coming after a lot of pressure, after a lot of guilting, after asking again and again with the threat of like some form of retaliation for saying no, then that's not a consensual activity. The other part is, or another myth is unconditional love, that you should love the person you're with no matter what happens, no matter what they do, just in general or to you. And that can be really harmful myth, because it could lead people to thinking that even if they have hurt me in some way, even if they have sabotaged me, even if they're making me actively unhappy and afraid, that I still have to love them, because that's what love means. A lot of times you might hear like love hurts and pain is a part of love and all of those things. And I mean, there's a certain extent where it can be true. Like there can be a breakup can be really, really painful. There can be some decisions where like neither party are going to be happy, and some sacrifices that have to be made. There can be loss. And, you know, when you love somebody so much and you lose them, that can be a really painful thing. But it shouldn't be the love itself that's painful. It shouldn't be love hurts, which justifies them being cruel to me or to the other person. Yeah. And so it's really important for young people to keep in mind that they can have boundaries and they can have lines. Like if sorry, my cat is behind me, is what you're probably seeing. But yeah, so if and it's important to talk through those lines and those boundaries of what is the condition for your relationship. Is it going to be if they become physically violent, which is always a really important red flag to keep out. That is a good sign that this relationship is is for sure an abusive one. Or is it that they don't want you to fulfill your dreams? You've always wanted to go to Harvard, and they say, no, I want you to stay and go to UW. And, you know, you shouldn't have to sacrifice those kinds of dreams for a relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Annie. It's cool. So we talked about myths. So now we're gonna, talk about the facts, right? In fact, like I mentioned earlier, trust, independence, consistency, these are all healthy things. This can look like encouraging our partners to pursue their own lives, like Annie was just saying, right? Pursue their dreams, pursue their own relationships with their friends, family, coworkers, peers, whatever that might be. Do their own activities that they like to do that are separate from us, right? I like the statement, a relationship should be a fulfilling part of your life, because it can be read a couple of different ways, right? One, it should be fulfilling. So we want our relationships to be fun. We want them to be something that we're actively excited about. We want to look forward to spending time with our partners. We want to be excited to talk about our relationship with other people, right? It should be a fun, positive part of our life that adds to it. And with that, a relationship should be a fulfilling part of your life. So a relationship should not be your whole entire world, necessarily. It shouldn't be like the only thing that you're forced to kind of care or think about. Your partner should not be making you feel like it's, your job to only focus on the relationship and nothing else, right? You shouldn't have to be sacrificing those big dreams. You shouldn't have to be sacrificing your friends, your family, your other activities. Addressing our own insecurities, right? We want to be like aware of, if I'm feeling jealous, if something's going on and I'm not feeling good about this, how can I move forward? How can I kind of deal with that with myself first, and then maybe have a respectful conversation about that thing, instead of just jumping straight to, I deserve to control this person. I deserve to do these things, treat them this way, set these kinds of rules, all of that stuff. And then again, yeah, consistency in communication and actions, right? We want to be not walking on eggshells. We want to be sure and confident when we're going into conversations and interactions in our relationship. And so making sure that we're acting in those ways that are consistent and are just like safe and healthy for the other person. And so with that, we're going to talk just briefly over the next couple slides about healthy conflict and nonviolent communication. When we're talking about conflict and communication in general, the reason that human beings communicate with each other is to get needs met. That's the basic reason why we say anything to anyone ever. And sometimes it can be like very explicit, like, hey, I need you to please do this thing for me. And sometimes it's not explicit at all, right? We're communicating to you all who are watching this right now because we have a need that people understand healthy relationships and we have to do our job. So, those are our needs. So that can look a lot of different ways, right? And one of the biggest ways that those kinds of needs being met happens is through conflict. Because like I mentioned, every single relationship is going to have conflict. People are different. They have different needs. They have different boundaries. They have different preferences. And those things are not always going to match up with one another. The world would be a very weird and homogenous place if that were the case. And so again, conflict is a huge way that this communication happens. And so healthy conflict tends to look like there's safety, right? When you're expressing the need that you have, the thing that clashes with your partners, you feel safe doing so. And of course, vice versa, they feel safe being honest and open with you. They don't feel like they have to hide the truth from you, and the other way around. There's intentional listening. So like we mentioned earlier, you're not just kind of hearing them, but you're also fully listening and acknowledging that what they're saying is true for them. Even if it's not true for you, even if it will never be true for you, you're understanding this is a big deal for them, or else they probably wouldn't be bringing it up, right? They probably wouldn't be saying it for no reason if it didn't matter to them at all. And then, of course, we have, with healthy conflict, the goal of problem solving. So if you remember back at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about toxic relationships a little bit. One of the key features of a toxic relationship is that the conflicts that happen in those relationships, they tend to look like both people are trying to kind of win. They're trying to one up the other person. They're trying to get like the last word or have the best roast or any of that stuff, right? It kind of looks like butting heads. And whatever it is that sparked the initial conflict tends to actually kind of fall by the wayside and get forgotten. And both people are sort of going at each other. So in healthy conflict, we want to really keep in the forefront of our minds that there's an issue, right? There's something that needs to get resolved. And so rather than working against each other, let's work together to try to figure out this thing and make it not an issue anymore. And so we'll take a closer look at nonviolent communication. This is something, if you haven't heard of Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, we would highly recommend it. It's one of our kind of like foundational books in this department. We find it really, really useful. I find it useful just like personally and professionally. I think it's just great. He's got a lot of great stuff to say, so would definitely recommend. But he has 4 kind of tenets of nonviolent communication that he likes to highlight in that book and in his work, which we often like to use in our prevention work as well. Annie, do you want to go over these? I can also do it if you don't feel like it.
Yeah, sure. So it's using nonviolent communication is a 4-step process. So, and I do want to give a quick, there is a word for what I'm describing.
Disclaimer?
Sure. Yeah. I do. Well, yes. No. It's the closest to. There's another word, but we'll say disclaimer. Is that it really only works if both people are willing to come to a resolution. Both people are doing it in good faith. If one person does not care about the needs of the other person and they only care about their own needs, then it's not going to be successful. But in most cases, even in toxic relationships, even with people who just really struggle communicating a lot, they still do care about the person that they are communicating with, even if it's just on a human to human level. So the first step in nonviolent communication is to observe. If there is a conflict, and you are wanting to address it, then the first thing is to observe concrete behaviors that the other person is doing that bothers you. An example is if every day they come home and leave their socks on the living room floor, and then they don't do their dishes, and then they don't clean things up when they spill it, then pointing out those concrete behaviors like, hey, I've noticed that you leave your socks on the floor, or that you don't clean up when you spill it. And instead of, you're a total slob, or I've noticed you're a messy person, because those are attacks on character, and that kind of allows, or it triggers that person to put up a defensive barrier and then engage in the conversation defending all of the things that they do that are clean. Like, oh yeah, well, I'm the one who does the laundry, so I'm not messy, you're messy. And instead it allows them to focus on the specific behaviors that you would like to see changed. The next thing is to feel or describe how you feel about those actions that they're doing. For example, when you don't clean up your spills or when you leave your socks on the floor, it makes me feel frustrated, and it makes me feel like like the house is not being respected and our common space is not being respected. And then something to avoid with this is blame or accusations, especially saying that the person that you are communicating to is doing this to upset you, saying that you just want to make me angry, or that what you're doing is pissing me off because you just think that our house is your place to go and leave your socks all over. Because that again is going to make the person feel defensive. And the next is stating a need. How does this situation that you're communicating about not be meeting your needs? What need is being ignored? So for example, in this situation, it would be, I need to feel like my living space is clean, and I need to feel like you're respecting me and you're not having an expectation that I clean up after you. And avoid stating it as a controlling demand, like, I need you to pick up your socks, I need you to stop being a slob, I need you to do this, this, and this. Because when you're stating this specific part as a reasonable need, then you're stating why it's important to you. The request is what comes next, and that should be clear and direct. So this is when you say, I need you to put your socks away, or I need you to clean up when you have a spill, and avoid negative statements like, I need you to stop being so messy, or I need you to stop being a slob, or I need you to be better, because that's not giving them specific actions that they can take. So, yeah, hopefully that was a good, there's a whole book about it. So I can only really cover so much in like 5 minutes, but I think the idea got across.
Totally. Yeah, I always wish this were like a neat little acronym, but it's just not like OFNER.
Offner.
Yeah.
Everyone remember Offner.
Yes. Super easy and just rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, highly recommend to go check it out. And so kind of with that, we just really quick, we'll go over healthy communication. We could also spend hours talking about just this, but we don't have hours. So yeah, again, we want to make sure this is honest, right? So that looks a couple different ways. One, of course, is that you're being honest with one another. You're not telling lies. You're not concealing the truth to try to get your way. You're not, being shifty or sneaky. You're being open, being vulnerable, being clear. And the other side of honesty is kind of like I mentioned earlier, that both people feel comfortable being honest. So that like expectation of openness, vulnerability, straightforwardness, that has to come with the expectation that it is okay to do that. If you feel like you are too scared to tell the truth or to say something that happened or to say how you truly feel, because you fear what your partner might say or do to you, that is not okay. That's not okay for them to be creating that space for you. So honesty has a couple of different layers to it that are both really, really important together. Healthy communication is safe, sort of along those lines, right? We want to feel safe saying how we actually feel. The words and tone and body language that we are using should be safe. They should not be intimidating. They should not be belittling or any of that. Health communication is accepting and validating. Again, we talked about that as well. Accepting that whatever you're saying, it's true for you. I get it. I hear you, right? Even those little phrases like, I understand that, or I hear you, those can go a really long way in just kind of letting them know that regardless of how you personally feel about the thing they're saying, you can understand that they're saying it because it matters to them. Healthy communication, again, it's consistent, right? We're not walking on eggshells. We're not making our partner feel like they have to be walking on eggshells. We're giving them a relatively consistent reaction, tone, kind of like affect, all of that stuff to make them, again, feel safe. And then healthy communication should also be assertive. So this means communicating your needs in a way that is clear and kind and direct. So you're coming right out and you're saying what you need. You're saying how you feel, but you're not doing so in a way that is putting them down or squashing their thoughts or their feelings or their opinions. You're not bulldozing over them, but you're also not sidestepping your own needs or shoving your own needs aside for the sake of theirs. You're finding that middle ground of, I deserve to be heard. I deserve to have my needs met. And I also have a responsibility to be kind and respectful at the same time. And those two things can absolutely 100% exist at the same time, actually pretty easily. So that's maybe another myth, is that, in order to get your needs met, you have to be super like loud or outspoken or bulldoze over everybody, because that's not always the case. Cool. And then the last kind of feature of growing healthy relationships that we have here today are boundaries and consent. Annie, would you like to do this one, or do you want me to?
I will do boundaries if you would like to do consent.
Yeah, let's do it.
Right. So boundaries are an extremely important thing, especially, what is the title of this webinar again? I can't remember.
Growing healthy relationships.
Yeah, especially when you're growing a healthy relationship. So in the beginning of a relationship, it's important to set boundaries because it's a lot easier to set them from the get-go rather than to change them later on, which is of course always okay to change your boundaries. It just keeps things a bit easier when you start off with strong boundaries in the beginning. So there's 5 kinds of different boundaries: physical, emotional, intellectual, time, material. Physical boundaries relate to your body, and that could be what kind of touch you like, whether that's like if you want to have sex, or if you want to hold hands or hug somebody, or even just any sort of physical contact. It has to do with what, or another example of a physical boundary is food, how you eat, how you treat your body. If somebody's boundary is around being a vegetarian, then they don't eat meat, and that should be respected by other people and not be pushed or not have them be made fun of for that. Or it could be around like kosher, halal, what they do and do not consume for religious reasons or for allergy reasons like dairy or gluten. It could also relate to physical exertion and exercise. For example, knowing when your body's boundaries are for running, when you're going to pass out, or just whether or not you're able to do something in a sport. Like, for example, when you could play soccer after healing from a broken ankle.
Not a specific situation to me at all. No.
No, Olivia knows
Totally
nothing about
hypothetical.
that. The next one are kind of boundaries, emotional boundaries, and this has to do with your emotional well-being and safety and expectations. So, for example, how much time you can spend talking about other people's feelings. Like maybe if somebody is going through a traumatic event, but you are really overwhelmed right now and you are dealing with things of your own, you might not have the emotional capacity to talk about that with them. Or if you feel like a friend is overburdening you with their what's going on with their lives, then and you just aren't able to handle that. It could also be around what you're comfortable sharing with other people yourself. Some people really just do not like talking about their feelings with people that they don't really trust. And that would be an emotional boundary that they would set. Intellectual boundaries are around your opinions and ideas and thoughts are. And so that could respecting someone's intellectual boundaries means not telling them that they're stupid for having their ideas or their opinions, or just invalidating who they are and what their beliefs are. Time boundaries have to do with like scheduling and how much time you're willing to put into something. It can also be around work. For example, like at 5 o'clock, don't send me, I'm not going to respond to any emails. Or just in your personal life, like I'm not going to, like you can't expect me to respond to a text as soon as you send it. I'm going to respond in my own time because I'm not available 24/7. And material boundaries have to do with what you own and your material goods. So that includes money, cars, your personal space like your room, laptops, cell phones, and how you are comfortable with other people and yourself interacting with them. So everybody has different boundaries, and every relationship has its own boundaries as well. And that's okay. You can't expect everyone else to share your same boundaries. You cannot expect everybody else to know what your boundaries are. There's something that have to be communicated. And so if you are finding yourself in a situation where someone's not respecting your boundaries, it's extremely important to speak out and let them know, because they might not even be aware that what they're doing is making you uncomfortable or crossing a line. Boundaries can be fluid, they can change over time, and a boundary that you set at the beginning of a relationship doesn't have to be there the whole time if you change and if you no longer feel the need to hold that. At the same time, something that you're comfortable with in one relationship or at one point during a relationship can change, and you can decide that you're no longer comfortable with it.
Yeah, definitely. And so with boundaries, transitions nicely into talking about consent. And so one of like the other really important things about boundaries in general and communicating them is that I think there's another myth, I guess, that we could have talked about is that boundaries are somehow like isolating or scary, or like that if you set a boundary, you're being rude or you're being like aggressive or like, you know, you're being scary to someone else. And it does not have to be that way. In fact, it should not be that way. Setting boundaries should be something that should come naturally. It should be comfortable and it should be expected in a relationship. And in fact, boundaries actually make relationships more like open and more honest. Because again, of everything Annie said, right? Like if you and your partner both know each other's boundaries, and you know that it's okay if they change and it's okay to have conversations about them, that just like opens a million doors in your relationship, and it just makes everything, all of your communication with your partner much easier, much more healthy, much more safe. And so one of the biggest ways that that comes across is in consent. So when we're talking about respecting boundaries, asking people what they like, what they don't like, consent is the big word that comes to mind for us. So a lot of times we talk about consent, or when anyone talks about consent, you might think first of like sexual intimacy, sexual contact, any of that stuff. That is 100% true. Consent is absolutely mandatory in all those situations. And we also like to talk about it in general too, in like non-sexual situations as well, in any kind of interaction or circumstance in a relationship that you might be having, especially if it is something, even if it's non-sexual, like something that might be kind of scary or something that you might not have done before. Those things can happen in any other context as well. So we like to talk about consent, and make it just really open and accessible for all kinds of situations, because again, we know that intimacy and sex are not necessarily parts of every single relationship, but consent does need to be. So there are a couple of different like key parts of consent that are really important. We like to use the acronym VOICE. So starting with the V, we have verbal. So when you are asking for consent, you are listening for a verbal yes, okay, sure, sounds good, right? Whatever that might sound like for that person. You're asking them for their consent, you're asking them for their permission to do something, right? If it's okay for you to do this thing, or if you can do this thing together. You want to make sure that what you're hearing is words coming from their mouth, right? It's not just like a shrug. Another thing that's really important here is, right, body language, flirting, clothing, those things do not count as verbal consent. Those are not like verbal okays from the person. Those are separate things. You still need to ask for consent. Ongoing, revocable. So ongoing, if you consent to something today, that does not mean that you necessarily consent to it tomorrow and the next day and forever, right? For every separate encounter, it is the person's responsibility to ask for consent every time, even if it is the exact same activity. Again, maybe until that boundary is changed within the relationship and the other person says, hey, you don't have to ask me this every single time. I feel comfortable with, consistently saying yes to this thing right now. And kind of with that, we have revocable. So at any time during an activity, again, whether that's sex or anything else, you are allowed to take back the yes that you gave. So if you said yes and then you start doing the activity and you're like, ooh, actually, I do not like this, I'm uncomfortable, it's totally okay to say, stop, pause, I want to stop now. And that's totally fine. And it's all of our responsibilities to understand that that's true, and that that's a possibility, and to respect that if it does happen. The I is informed. So everybody has a right to know what it is they are consenting to exactly. So there shouldn't be any deception. There shouldn't be any kind of like lying or masking the truth when you're asking someone for their consent. A big one that we like to use as an example is, if your friend is eating some French fries and you ask them if you can have some, and they say, yeah, sure, you can have some, and you take their entire thing of fries, that's not informed consent, right? They said you could have some. If you took the whole thing, you didn't tell them you were going to take their entire thing. So that's not real and informed consent. Conscious, you got to be awake, you got to be aware, and you got to be alert to give consent. So if someone is drunk, high, like they just got their wisdom teeth out, they're all loopy, if they're asleep, they certainly cannot consent, right? Any of these situations, their brain is not fully functioning, they are not fully aware of their surroundings and what's going on, therefore they cannot give fully informed consent. And then lastly, we have enthusiastic. So generally, right, we want people to be excited about doing stuff with us. We want people to be saying yes because they want to be, not because they feel pressure to, they feel intimidated, they feel like they have to. So we want to be checking that when we're asking, the other person seems enthusiastic about saying yes. And that enthusiasm can look different person to person. Not everyone is going to be like, yay, yes, like cheerleader vibes. Some people might be a little bit more chilled out. They might say like, yeah, sure, sounds good. So it's really important that we know like what enthusiasm looks like for that person, and that then we're kind of following that and checking in. So again, consent shows respect for boundaries. It shows respect for autonomy, that everyone is their own person with their own rights. And of course, for safety as well. Someone does not respect your consent, that becomes a very unsafe and potentially traumatic situation. So consent is huge, huge, huge in healthy relationships. Anything to add on that, Annie?
No, you did a really thorough job.
Sweet. Okay, so we're gonna kind of come up to our last little bit here and just touch briefly on helping others grow their relationships. We focused a lot on these healthy relationship strategies. Hopefully you will take these with you and never ever forget them, and you'll kind of help do that in your own lives, in your own relationships. And so we want to talk just a little bit about, like, if you have a friend or someone else in your life that you are either worried about or just kind of like want to have a conversation with about healthy relationships. This does get particularly relevant when you are concerned that someone is potentially in an abusive relationship or that they are perpetuating abuse toward their partner. These are both very, very scary situations to be in as a third party, right? If you find out that your friend might be experiencing abuse or that they might be abusing, those are both really hard situations for you. So you want to make sure that you are in a place, remember we talked about emotional boundaries, right? You want to make sure that you are in a place where you feel like you can help them out. You can kind of take this on, because again, if you aren't able to grow yourself, it's going to be really hard to help someone else kind of grow this. So I'll talk first about like supporting a survivor or someone that you might be worried about is experiencing some not so great stuff in their relationship. There are a couple of key things that you can do, just like as a friend, as a peer, a sibling, like whatever that might be, just to kind of help them out. And they're simple things, but they can go a really long way. First one is letting them know that you're there for them. That sounds really like simple, and that's because it is really simple. It can literally be a statement of, hey, I'm here for you, right? Let me know if you need anything. It doesn't have to be like deep. It doesn't have to delve into all the nitty-gritty details of what's happening to them. They might not want to share anything that's going on. That's okay. You can just say, hey, I'm here for you. Just let me know. That can go a really long way, because presumably if they are in a relationship that is abusive or that is just like not great, they're not feeling good about it, they're probably not getting the messaging from their partner that, you know, someone's consistently there for them, that they have someone in their corner. So to have like a friend or a peer or a sibling say that to them, that can go a really long way. Reinforcing to them that they deserve respect and safety is another huge way to help other people grow healthy relationships or leave relationships or cope with relationships that are not healthy. So reinforcing, hey, like, you deserve to be respected, you deserve to be safe, right? It can be as blatant as saying that to them, and it can also be shown through actions, right? Making sure that when you are hanging out with them, no matter like when or how often that might get to be, that when you're with them, you are going out of your way to be really respectful for them or to them, and to create a space where it is safe for them to wear what they want to wear, eat what they want to eat, talk to who they want to talk to without fear of like punishment or retaliation. And again, that helps them. That helps them realize, hey, yeah, like this is how I deserve to be treated by someone who claims that they care about me, right? Asking non-judgmental questions. So if you have a friend who does decide that they're going through something, they do want to talk details with you. Really important that like the kind of questions and statements that you are making of them will not be judgmental or blamey. So it might be really tempting, right? If you're freaked out, if you hear some stuff and you're like, oh my God, this is a lot. It might be tempting to say things like, oh my God, how could you let this happen? Why are you still with them? Why don't you just leave? Right? All these number of different questions. Even statements like, oh my God, your partner is the worst person to ever walk this earth, right? Those are things that might feel very, very real for you. And you might have very hard evidence that those things are true, right? Terrible things might be happening. Even in those cases, we want to make sure that we're not judging our friends, the survivors, whoever that might be. We want to make sure the questions that we're asking are more along the lines of like, how can I support you, right? How does it feel to you when your partner does this thing, right? They're open, they're non-judgmental, and they allow space for that person to kind of answer and react in the way that is going to be helpful to them. And even if it is tempting to make those really big judgments of their partner, even if, again, we have all the evidence that maybe they're being abusive, maybe they're being a really unhealthy partner, if we say something to a survivor like, oh my God, your partner is a horrible person, they're the worst, right? It's pretty likely that if our friend is in a relationship where they are being belittled, blamed, guilted constantly, they might hear something like that and they might take it and turn it in on themselves. They might hear that and say, you're right. I'm so stupid for having chosen them as a partner. I should have known better. Like, this is my fault, right? And we do not want to make them feel like that. We don't ever want to put something on a survivor to imply that it is in any way their fault what they're experiencing, because we know that that's not the case. We also want to be really respectful of their decisions and their autonomy, right? No matter what's happening, they're still their own person. So they might choose to stay in that relationship. They might not choose to make the changes that we think they should make, or that we think we would make if we were in their shoes, right? And that might be frustrating, might be scary for us, but we have to understand they're their own person. Again, they are not getting the messaging in their relationship that their decisions or autonomy matters at all. So we want to be doing the opposite of that. We want to be saying, okay, you know what? Like, I respect you as a person. I respect whatever it is you decide to do. Just let me know how I can help you. And then, of course, sharing resources and sharing knowledge if they're open to it. There's plenty of resources out there, including our support line, which we'll share at the end of this presentation. And hopefully all the knowledge that you learned today that you're going to remember forever and ever, just kind of dropping that in with them when they feel comfortable or when they feel ready for it. Like, hey, actually recently learned that, you know, in a healthy relationship, things are supposed to be like this. XYZ thing is supposed to happen. Those things can go a really long way when it's coming from like a friend to a friend, as opposed to like, you know, watching a webinar about it. So those can be some really important ways to kind of support a friend that you think might be going through some hard stuff in their relationship. Annie, would you like to do the combating unhealthy behaviors or?
Sure.
Cool.
And that was a really great way of talking about this.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you are in a situation which can be a really scary and hard and awkward situation of noticing that someone in your life, whether that's a friend or a family member, or a client, is doing, sorry, excuse me, is engaging in unhealthy or abusive behaviors with their significant other, it's really important to step in and say something about it. But when you do that, there's a few things that you should keep in mind and a few ways that you can do it in a way to protect the person that they are in a relationship with. The first is to be mindful of any potential repercussions. For example, if someone has, say like your sister has told you that their boyfriend hit them or hit her, or if someone else that you know has directly told you about abusive behavior that they are experiencing from their partner, confronting their partner and saying, you did this to this person I care about, is likely going to cause them to retaliate against their partner. How could you tell them? Or why would you lie even if they told the truth? Or why would you humiliate me? Why would you make me look bad? Why are you trying to ruin my life? And that can be really scary and even really dangerous for the person who told you. It can also be a betrayal of trust, because they likely assumed that what they told you would be kept private. And so they might not come back and talk to you in the future if they've felt that betrayal of trust or if they received retaliation in some way. It's a really good way of approaching it is to, sorry, my cat is, go away.
Oh, there she is.
How do I make her appear?
I saw her for a second.
Yeah. Oh well. She's a cutie. But sorry about that. Yeah, so a good way of talking about this is to observe direct behaviors if you have the chance. For example, if you witness someone call their partner stupid or yell at them or do something abusive or harmful, then talking about those stated behaviors that you observed without throwing their partner under the bus. Saying when you do talk to them, it's really important to pull them aside sometimes and talk to them in private, so you don't embarrass their partner and so you don't cause potential harm. And if that's not possible, for example, like if you're in a car or if you're in a place where the abusive behavior is happening, it's still important to step in, even if you can't do that in private, just so that way their partner knows that somebody is seeing what's happening and is standing up for them, and that what's they're experiencing isn't normal. Saying phrases like, hey, that's not cool, I don't like how you're treating them, or just phrases like that, which are not confrontational, instead of saying like insulting them and using things that might trigger them to become upset at you, because this can, in some cases, be a dangerous situation for the person who does step in. And also, if you are approaching it from a position of insulting them, then they're likely going to shut down and they're not going to take what you say seriously, and they're going to be more focused on the attack of their character rather on the what their behaviors are doing to affect their partner. So yeah, those are some ways that you can confront somebody who is doing abusive behaviors.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, we just kind of like to talk about this because I think when we're talking about helping others grow their relationships, first and foremost, it's just, all the same stuff that we just went over, all these different strategies. Hopefully we can share those with our friends. We can demonstrate those in our relationships and, spread by example. But if there's a situation where you might be worried about someone, you want to help them grow maybe out of something that's unsafe or unhealthy, or just grow a relationship into something healthy, potentially, again, if it's not abusive, if it's maybe unhealthy, this can be a really good way to do that. So that is about it for us. We do want to say thank you so much for being here today, for watching, and definitely want to leave you with our support line. This is 24/7, 365 days a year. It's DVS confidential support line. We have advocates who are wonderful, who will talk to you at any time if you have questions about your own relationship, if you're worried about someone else, if you just want to know more, if you just have some clarifying questions, they can help direct you to other resources as well. They're really helpful. And then if you have any more questions or comments for us, specifically in the prevention department, you're welcome to email us at preventiondvs@dvssnowcode.org. We will definitely look at and answer any questions and comments as well. So yeah, I think that's all we've got. Thank you all for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye. I'm gonna stop the recording.